Good afternoon. My name is Ronan McGreevy, and this is the latest episode of At Coffee at Wynns. And we're here in the beautiful confines of Wynns Hotel, and my guest today is Debbie Deegan, the founder of the charity To Russia with Love. And we'll be talking to her about her charity work and about all things Russian. Debbie, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
So Debbie, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became involved in Russia.
So we got involved, like an awful lot of Irish families, back in the day, 1995, when children were coming in from Chernobyl. And so we took children into our home, and that kind of got us involved in the whole story of Russia, really. And then 3 years later, I went to Russia on my first trip to find two children that had stayed with us. And that was what brought me on that journey, because really at the time, to me, it was a big, dark, scary place, and we didn't really know any Russians, and it was the country you didn't visit then, and we'd all heard about the economic crash, etc. at the time. So I went in on this kind of naive journey I brought my little suitcase full of sweets and balloons, because I was going to change children's lives with sweets and balloons. And I did what kind of most people at the time were doing, which was naive humanitarian aid, housewives like me, etc. I was an at-home mum at the time.
So you hadn't any involvement in charity work before that, or
no
Russia
intentions.
or anything like that?
We're not a wealthy couple or anything, but I had decided to stay at home and mind my kids at the time.
And you had two children at the time?
I had two small children at the time. And that's what happened. So I went in and I took a flight to Minsk, which is in Belarus, and drove through the night in this environment of, we drove for about 7 hours through what seemed to be one forest. It's extraordinary. I know you haven't been. It's an extraordinary sight, Russia, Belarus, because it's just long, straight roads for like hundreds, if not thousands of miles. I think they're probably built for military mobility. But the forests are spectacular. The snow was spectacular. It was an incredible experience. It was like, to me, I saw the romantic side of it, maybe from the word go. I had rose-colored glasses, maybe, but it was like Narnia to me. The snow, the forests, the little villages. It was just spectacular. So I just wasn't expecting the kind of, I don't mean the romance of it, I'm not trying to be it wasn't the Dr. Zhivago, I wasn't being ridiculous about it, but it was really beautiful. The sky was so high, the sky is much higher than here, I think, because the country is so vast, so when you look up, it's this absolutely monstrous sky, like billions of stars on view, which we kind of don't see here, maybe because I live in a city, etc. And then of course I went through the gates of an orphanage, which again, as an Irish mam, or very ordinary person, I wasn't prepared really for what an orphanage does to a young Irish mum. So I went through the gates of this like rickety gates. Most orphanages then were in forests because they wanted to keep the children out of the eye line of towns, which we probably did ourselves in Ireland. And I walked through the gates of this place, and really, when I don't mean the rest was history, but like for me, the love story began, I would say, on the first day for me. I mean, it was to see hundreds of children from 6 up. There was no babies. We didn't do baby orphanages. We've never really done that much in baby orphanages. But there were 6 up. And so we had little ones of 6 and tiny things. With kids with shaved heads. We had boys of 18 with no teeth and tattoos that you would be afraid to look at sideways. And 1998 was a terrible time in Russia because the economy had just crashed, and so state people hadn't been paid for 6 months. Teachers, doctors, which I didn't actually even know any of that at the time. And so the place was really in a terrible condition. Windows were broken. It was minus 30. Minus 30 is very cold. And no heating working, no running water, no toilets working. So we'd 80 boys in one block with no bathroom, no loos, which the smells were overpowering. It was an overwhelming experience for me at the time. Misery, in a word, misery. Fear, kids lost, and it hit me like a truck. It really did hit me like a truck. I'd never intended to go back again. I'd brought in my little, as I say, pathetic suitcase of humanitarian aid. And when I was leaving, I had children around me all week, and I just made a promise to one little girl that was there at the time, who since is now running our operation for us, 25 years on. But she was there on the day, and I was kissing her goodbye, and I'd promised her I'd come back. And I was bowled over by it. I came home, I was having a whinge at the table. At the time, the Chinese orphanages had just come on stream on our TVs, so we saw all the girl babies being strapped to cots and strapped to potties and all that. And plus, we were all aware of the mess in Romania, which I've since been to myself. And Romania was absolutely horrific, like no comparison to Russia, much worse, because of the abuse, the sheer violence towards the children. We didn't see any of that in Russia. We didn't have the trafficking. I mean, I saw stuff in Romania that I'll take to my grave. And I decided, I came home, I spoke to people around me, very good, ordinary people, and said, look guys, I've left a forest full of kids there. I just felt it wasn't the right, I just felt I could not settle. People were saying, you'll be grand, just settle down, you'll be grand. I didn't settle down. And so we did a big article with one of the Sunday papers. We had Pat Kenny, I rang the Late Late Show, Pat Kenny put me on as it happened. And I didn't know him from Adam. I'd never been on TV before. Of course I knew him just as a journalist. And I did an ask, and that kind of got us on our feet, and we set up an organisation, and that was 25 years ago.
And that is To Russia With Love.
To Russia With Love. We changed the name after 15 years because we took on an Irish project, so we weren't specifically Russian. But for 15 years we were absolutely specifically Russian.
And what did you do in Russia?
My initial goal for a week, my initial goal was, okay, let's paint the place pink, let's put in cushions, let's put in fluffy bedspreads, that whole thing. At the time it was kind of trendy to do that. Annika Rice was flying around the world on helicopters. We were watching her on the TV. She'd go in and do up an orphanage in 24 hours, as we saw. I think Daniel O'Donnell was involved in Romania as well, and we kind of saw edited programmes. I thought I could do that as well, and little did I know. So my initial dream was that kind of fluffy foolishness of let's paint it pink and it'll all be grand, we can go home then. We might have had a 1-year plan, just about a 1-year plan. And I took a team back with me, and very serious humanitarians, a doctor, nurse, journalist, documentary maker, builder, and we sat down around a table and thought, look, this is not about painting somewhere pink and giving them fluffy pillows, but a few bottles of Calpol and toilet rolls. It's not about a convoy coming in with new clothes from Dublin. It's about, we decided we were going to make a really, really serious job of trying to change their lives. And I wasn't sure. We brought in somebody at the time from the health board, the Eastern Health Board at the time, and he did an assessment, and he came back and wrote my board at the time and said, you're wasting your time. You're not going to be able to spend Irish money wisely. Forget about it. There's too few of you. The problem is too big. You know, you'll never be able to change the system here. I mean, he wrote the most damning report, which I was reluctant to hand my board in case they would listen to him. And I decided, shag that, you know. It went in the bin after the board read it, and I decided we definitely can, even if we only did one, you know, that kind of thing, even if we only did one life. And without clapping ourselves on the back, we went on to change thousands of children's lives. I wouldn't say we dramatically changed thousands of children's lives in a very meaningful way, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds certainly. And any of the Irish that have been with me over the last 25 years would agree with me.
And how did you do that?
So I brought in like really wise heads with me, and who were very practical about how you make changes. I didn't know how you break down an institution. And like I knew I needed cleaner beds, I didn't know how to get them. I knew I needed to stop heads being shaved for lice reasons. I didn't know how to stop the system shaving heads. I didn't know how you got kitchens cleaner on a grand scale, you know, 300, 400 dinners a day. So I brought in systems people with me. The deputy governor of Wheatfield Prison came with me for 15 years, and he was obsessed with systems. And I couldn't bear systems. They bored me completely, but he was obsessed with them. Civil
this
servant.
Is John...
No, he was Mountjoy. John Lonergan.
Yeah.
No, Derek Tracy from Wheatfield.
Of course, yeah.
And Wheatfield had all the awards
Sure.
for everything. So the prisoners got involved. The prisoners carved me the most magnificent rocking horse and sent it in at one stage. And the prisoner warned me I better go where it was meant to be going, you know, because they were afraid I think I'd sell it off here, this beautiful thing. And the prisoners designed a playground for us here, and we took the plans out, and the guys over there built it. But anyway, the prisoners were a lovely asset to us at the time. And but the systems, the management from there put the systems in place. And we kind of played a card that I was all heart and he was all head, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And we kind of did that whole Debbie's
Good cop,
the
bad
emotional
cop,
one,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And I mean, I'm not, you know, but it did work well for us because we knocked down all the skittles one by one.
Yeah.
And then as we discovered that siblings had been separated, which really, really bothered me, into orphanages far like hundreds of miles away. And so we started trying to reunify siblings in the beginning, because I was horrified at that. And then children's heads, we stopped them being shaved. And because we were bringing money in at the time, and to be honest with you, really it didn't even matter that much, because the Russians were so receptive to the change and so welcoming, that anything we decided to do, they knew we weren't political and they knew we weren't religious.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of Baptists shifting around in buses from America, coming in with Bibles, and we had a lot of that going on. And they'd come in and they would like lecture the kids about Jesus or God or whatever it is they talk about. And then they'd leave nothing. You know what I mean? Whereas we were coming back again and again and again.
Right,
yes.
Yeah.
And so our local governor really did take us under his wing and gave me a green light. So we had full access to any institution we wanted to go into, no matter how dark and awful they were.
And this is in one part of Russia, right?
This is in Bryansk, which actually was mentioned last week on the news, because supposedly there was bombs there last week.
And that's close to the border with Ukraine, yeah?
Yes, it is, yeah. So that's where my current orphanage would be, close to the border.
Okay, and you did that job you went over and back for 25 years. Did I hear that you made about 500 trips to Russia? Or is it
you did, yeah. I think we did. I did that at least, I'd say. Yeah, back and forward.
So you must have been going every couple of weeks.
I was for the last 25 years, yeah.
And what's the impression you formed of the country from all the years you've been going there?
When I'm with Russians, my Russians over there, I fight with them about the system, about the way they are. But when I'm here, I defend them, because I'm nearly doing the opposite, you know.
Yeah.
I could never understand how mothers gave up their babies so easily. I could never understand
I think
that.
it's important just to interrupt you there. It's important to state that these orphanages, they're not, we think of an orphan as somebody who's lost their parents, right? Am I right in saying in a lot of these orphanages, they were just basically put in there, or that they still had their parents alive, is that right?
Yeah, about 45% of them, I think. Right. Half and half, I would say. There was about 900,000 orphans when we started. We had about 3,500 orphanages.
Yeah.
And Putin started the same time as me, so the two of us started our jobs the same year. Sure. He took over Russia. Yeah. So he was in the distance. Yeah. So we had to just... but he wasn't in our face in any way. And we had to... There was no Irish there. Like there was, in fact, in my 25 years, I think I've met one other organisation there, an English organisation. I've never met people there working there. But yeah, it was. And
was these orphanages were places not only where both parents had died, but also like they were in Ireland, where a mother can't cope with her children or whatever, or the children are in. Is that right?
It's very Soviet in their thinking. The Russians, Kate Adie, the war journalist, if you remember Kate Adie back in the day, she wrote a brilliant book. She was adopted, and she wrote a brilliant book at one stage that I read years and years ago about the fact, and she talks about orphanages, and she went around the world looking at different orphanages in the Soviet system. But Russian people, if they're drunk, after perestroika, really, the country crashed to its knees, and people they took away communism and they replaced it with capitalism, but they replaced it with nothing actually. Sure. So people had free education, free cars, a free holiday once a year. They got their brown suit, their brown school uniform, blah 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 blah, and suddenly they had nothing. So they weren't coping on a major scale, and so an awful lot of people. Vodka was the alternative, and it is the curse of the country. And in a lot of the villages and that, they'd make their own like hooch. And so if in Russia, they're very strict about the fact, if you're a drug addict or if you're an alcoholic and you're at home with a child, the police will come straight into your house, take that child and put it in an institution.
Wow.
If
A bit like Ireland was back in the day.
Well, the priest would come in and take your child if you're a single mother or whatever, but the police would so the children were taken, but the mothers weren't taken. So babies were taken and put into orphanages. And I suppose before my time, maybe, I don't even know if adoption existed then. Did it? I'm sure it did. We were never involved in adoption. It was a big money business.
Sure.
And so there was a lot of babies adopted to the States. Baptists came in. Sure. I think they thought they were close to Jesus, and so this was a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah.
So they had a lot of the children would have had parents, but in prison and imprisoned far too easily, and would be drunk or drug addicts at the time. So that's what we have. That's what we had back in the day. But they never saw their parents. We never, an odd time in our 25 years, and maybe I could count on one hand in 25 years how many times I saw a parent visiting the orphanage. I've seen children stand at the gate and wait on them. Or on their birthdays, they'd stand at the orphanage gates hoping a parent might arrive. But in my 25 years, I could count on one hand how many times that happened.
Wow. Can I just, obviously when you started out in 1998, the children there, they were at least the age of 6, so they're at least 24, 25 now. Some of them are presumably are well grown up. How have their lives turned out as far as you know?
Well, I know very well because we're still all in touch. Sure. And although we closed the organisation in February this year after 25 years, I haven't closed off. And my biggest worry personally about closing the organisation was that we'd made a lifetime commitment to these children that we would replace their parents as best we could. And so we tried to raise an orphanage of children initially of 250, nearly like family children. So it was like a huge adoption without the paperwork. We did bring them here on holidays, but that was we weren't big believers in that. We were more about changing their life there. So if they needed teeth looked after, if they needed glasses, if they needed hearing aids, if they needed a better education, if they needed to be lifted out of the orphanage and put into a private school if they were very clever children, because orphanage education would be poor because they were in villages in general. We lifted kids out, we put them into better schools, we put them into colleges, we put some kids into private universities. Sure. We found donors in Ireland who paid for that. And so anything we could do that we saw for that bunch of children, that original 250, anything they needed, we supplied. And then we went on to take on another 2 orphanages, 3, 4, 5, and at one point I was on a board of about 48 orphanages. So we had about maybe 7,000 children under our care, and we were able to influence really how care was in those places. So we had quite a voice. It helped to win medals you don't win medals over there, but you're presented with them from governors and all that. So I've more medals than, most would have, and ribbons and bows and all that. And I mean, you'd be very proud of them because they mean nothing here, absolutely nothing. But over there, if you go to a conference and you've been given it by your governor or whoever, it just means that you actually have a voice that they respect.
When you look back on the state that Russia was in when you first went over there in 1998, public servants weren't being paid, the orphanages were in a terrible state, the country was on its knees, it had been humiliated. Can you understand from a Russian point of view why so many of them ended up supporting Vladimir Putin?
I can understand it because in 25 years, with the amount of 10-hour train journeys I've been on with the Russians, going wherever we're going, we've had so many long conversations about the details of their views, stuff I would never have known as an Irish person, stories I never would have heard. And then also I'm in hotel rooms over there, and you're watching TV and you're looking at like absolute bullshit propaganda that is just so not true. And then also I'm listening to stories, like I saw stories unfolding over the years, and neither side had the story right. The West wasn't given the right details, the East wasn't given the right details, and somewhere in the middle was the truth. Like, journalists have such a responsibility to speak the truth. To me, I don't know what we hear anymore. You listen to Fox News or whoever at times, or Russia Today or whatever, and you're thinking, oh my God, how can they say that? It's so not true. But it's the way unfortunately, it's the way our world is operating now. It's very hard to find the real truth, I think, really. But
How has Russia changed, say, in the 25 years that you were involved in the
well,
trial?
what shocks me is I'm not an apologist. I'm anti-war.
Sure, yeah.
I'm not in any way, and I'm really genuinely so shocked that he went over that border. And one of the reasons I am is because under Putin's regime, Russia had changed really so dramatically in the 25 years. Like, the the children were well fed, watered. If there was any incidents in orphanages, they would put in extra security if we thought there was any, Moscow itself turned into, when I went there first in 1998, Moscow was like a grimy, dark, we used to call it Gotham City because you'd nearly, that feeling of intimidation. Recently, up to 2018, it was spectacular. I mean, what he did to it, it was like he turned it into a film set. Like thousands of cherry blossom trees that weren't even real. They're not real. They're those pretend ones down the streets. The Christmas lights are, I've never seen anything in my life like the Christmas lights. The hotels are spectacular. The Ritz-Carlton is amazing. You couldn't afford to have a glass of water in it. But Red Square is spectacular. I mean, he did an unbelievable job. I've no idea about the corruption and all that end of it and millions going missing or whatever, billions I'm sure. But he did an incredible job with it. I mean, St. Petersburg was always beautiful and tourists always went. But Moscow wasn't.
Yeah.
Even our own city of Bryansk improved so much. I mean, I watched it developing. I watched it becoming more European, more European.
Yeah.
They were travelling more and more people were going there. The football was the big thing. All the people went in and expected this dark place. And they were all pleasantly surprised. It was well run. There was no fighting, blah, 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 blah. And then for him to go over that border to me was just the most insane thing I ever saw, because it was like he just brought it back so far again.
Sure.
After watching him for decades building this place. I mean, I was at conferences there. I've never seen anything like the way they were organised. I mean, the last women's conference I was at in St. Petersburg, they beamed 2 female astronauts from space, like into the room with us, into holograms, to talk to us at the conference, like mental stuff. It was so impressive. And then look at it now. We're back in it's like we're back in the dark ages again. He's just cut the lifeline off to it again. I don't understand why he's done it.
Now, you have met him. Tell us about the circumstances which you met Vladimir Putin.
So I was, the organisation was awarded one of the biggest, it is the biggest award for a foreign organisation to get, and it's called an Order of Friendship. It's nearly like being knighted over there. It's bigger than a medal, kind of.
Sure, yeah.
And it can only come from the president. It's on behalf of the people, and the president gives it to you. And so we got it in 2018 after 20 years of work there. And we went, Patricia McGrath and myself, who ran the organisation with me, we went to Moscow, and we flew in specifically for it. It was just so James Bond. I cannot tell you, like, this stunning girl was at the airport in a presidential car. The blue light flashing, were brought right through the city into a private hotel of the president's. It was so enjoyable, the whole experience as a foreigner, because it was like literally being in a James Bond movie. The next morning, a cavalcade straight to the Kremlin. The gates are open to all these soldiers, extraordinary. And we'd no idea what we were going in for. We just thought there'd be hundreds of people in a room and everybody'd get a medal and off you'd go. And I went through those big golden doors that we're all seeing on the TV at the moment that he's coming through. And you go into this unbelievable room in the Kremlin. And I was brought up to the top table. I had no idea who would be. I assumed we'd be together. We weren't. Orchestras were playing, ballerinas were dancing. There was an opera singer singing. It was so impressive. And there was about 700 people for dinner. Film stars, war heroes, old men with medals everywhere. It was just an awesome room to walk into. And I was sat beside the patriarch Kirill, and I'm not a religious person at all, so I found that quite difficult. I was thinking, what am I going to talk to him about? Because would have to admit I'm not religious at all, and I was so irritated by the jewels on his costume because I'm fundraising, so that really, I was so irritated. It also bothers me when I see them in the Vatican. It's not just his.
Yeah, sure.
And so they sat me down at the table beside him, and I was tapped on the shoulder and then to be told that Vladimir Putin was joining me on my right for dinner. So my knees knocked for, I would say, 5 seconds. I was thinking, what am I going to talk to him about? You know, it's he's iconic to look at. The eyes, the face, the perfect suit. He's so straight, you know.
You sat next to him for 3 hours.
I did.
And what did you discuss with him?
I'm not short on words, but at the same time, you kind of don't want to be nattering like a, you know, in his ear. And I had so much to talk about from a childcare point of view. At the same time, it's not that appropriate to bring up when you're sitting at a table of golden cutlery and you're sitting there talking about orphans. But we did talk about Ireland. We talked about, he knew more about Irish poets certainly than I did. We talked about, he was talking about how beautiful Ireland was. The fishing came up. At the time I said to him if he wanted to come in fishing we could certainly organise that for him. And there was a huge stage show on at the time, like Riverdance for us. And so there was all different cultures on the stage, all the different cultures of Russia, and he talked me through each traditional costume, what they were doing, what they were from, what their religion was. So he explained in detail the whole concert to me.
And you found him, we don't have a lot of time left, but you found him, as I'm just taking him on a one-to-one basis, you found him to be very intelligent and charming.
I don't want people throwing eggs at me in the street for saying that, but there's no point in saying there was flames coming out of his ears. There wasn't. He's a diplomat. He was extremely diplomatic. And he was, he knew everything. He was well briefed about Ireland, and he knew what to talk. And he was a fan of Conor McGregor's because he's a judo player. I'm not a fan of Conor McGregor's, so we had a short conversation about that. But in general, a very easy conversation. And I'm not going to try and say nice things about him. I mean, I'm quite open about.
You have to do the
we were all diplomacy was one of our keys to success out there. We were never condescending, rude. We weren't. You know, we didn't get involved in politics. And he knew that. We weren't political or religious. An easy conversation for 3 hours. Okay.
The last question I'd ask you is, you decided in February of this year to close your charity.
Yes.
To Russia with Love. Can you tell us why?
Because we had done what we set out to do, really after about 10 years, but we really, with the thrust of our work, but because so many children were still so dependent on us, we really just wouldn't, and we were so small and so successful. And really, it's very addictive business when you watch children's lives changing. It's an extremely addictive business. And we were a well-run organisation full of really amazing people behind me. And so we just couldn't leave it. And I found it incredibly difficult, even after 25 years, to call it. And then, of course, we had shops in Dublin, which did very well, but thank God we did call it when we did. But the board made a decision last November that, okay, we've done our 25 years now, we really can't do much more for these children. Now, we're still funding some children in a smaller way, and I will be involved for the rest of my life. I was on to them yesterday, and we do have ongoing problems that we'll try and solve in a smaller way, and I have people who still want to help. Getting money out there now is going to be the trick for me, but I mean, I don't have to worry too much about it. There's not huge donations, but we will be involved for as long. I'll work with any children that, I mean, I'm working with Ukrainian children at the moment as well, so it's not, I don't see borders really. When children need help, they need help. But for me, Russia was certainly an amazing project.
Debbie Deegan, thank you very much for this fascinating discussion.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.